right, hello and welcome to today's webinar, Disaster Preparedness, Supporting Individuals with Brain Injury, which is offered by the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maria Crowley, NASHIA's Director for Professional Development, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. As you can see, you've got some logistical information in front of you. Closed captioning is available, and you can enable that at any time at the bottom of your viewing window. If you need any assistance during today's webinar, just feel free to send us a chat. Questions for the presenters can be added into the chat or the Q&A pane, and we can address those as we go along or at the end of today's webinar. If you're not familiar with our organization, NASHIA is a nonprofit organization created to empower state government and our partners to enhance collaboration and strengthen capabilities to address the needs of individuals and their support systems. And as you can see, in addition to numerous training opportunities that we provide, we do a lot of other things, as evidenced by some of the tabs here on your screen. We would love for you to consider joining our organization if you're not a member already. There's a lot of benefits to being a part of us. And there are some new benefits coming your way that have come your way, actually, as part of our training and education work. As you may know, if you've joined us before, we have certificates and social work CEs, and you can see the information here. All this will be available to you at the end of the webinar, and if you have any questions about them, you can certainly contact me. Everything will be archived towards the end and be available to you on our website under Trainings on Demand. And with that, I'm going to move into our presentation. And as we do that, I will share slides with you as our presenters talk, but you can see their live faces in front of you, and you can see an image of them over here on the screen as well. With us from AC Disaster Consulting are Liz Gerdeman, Kate Donaldson, and Liz Rowell, and we are very excited that you are joining us, and I'm going to leave it up to them to introduce themselves, but welcome so much. We are so glad that you're here.
Thank you so much for inviting us and setting aside time for this topic this year. We're really grateful to be here, and it's awesome to see so many familiar names in the participants so far. And I'll kick us off. So I'm Liz Gerdeman. Many of you know me because I came from the brain injury field right before I came to AC Disaster Consulting. I was the director for the program at the Colorado Department of Human Services for the brain injury program there for almost 4 years. And then prior to that, I was with the Brain Injury Alliance, now Association of Colorado, for almost 9 years. I also worked at Children's Hospital Colorado for a couple of years on research related to kiddos with brain injury. So was in your field for a long time, and then almost 2 years ago kind of pivoted to the disaster space and have been working with this company since then. So I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves, and then we'll talk a little bit more about who we are, what we do, and then get into the details of our content. Who wants to go?
I'll take it. Thanks, Liz. I am Liz Rowell, so I'm really excited to be here. My background, I started out my career as a first responder and a paramedic down south. And then, like all first responders in my field, we transitioned into emergency management. So I've been in emergency management planner for the past 6 or 7 years now. I've worked for local jurisdictions as well as state jurisdictions. I also was heavily involved in the state of Vermont during the COVID response, where I worked in vaccine clinics and was in charge of running several testing and vaccine clinics within the state of Vermont. That actually really sparked me into getting a focus on health and human services to help really bolster my emergency management knowledge, which led me to get my master's of public health. So really dedicated to looking at a whole community and making sure that we're serving and communicating with all populations and making sure that we do the best to plan for and prepare against disaster. So really excited to be here and looking forward to chatting. Great.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning. I also come from a public health background and bring that experience to emergency management. So I support our Health and Human Service line at ACDC or AC Disaster Consulting. You'll hear us say ACDC today. I joined ACDC during COVID. Like a lot of people, I really wanted to just be on the front lines and didn't know how and where and when I could turn to help. And so I landed in the state of Oregon, helping folks that were living in long-term care facility, assisted living, behavioral health, really maintain their housing and maintain access to services during the COVID pandemic, because we know that caused quite the disruption for those populations living in shared living facilities. So since then, it's been a wild ride of supporting after action reviews and operational planning updates. But really all of the work that we've done and I've done with ACDC has been centered around putting people first, right? And really trying to address and prevent the impacts that we continue to see with these complex disasters. So really passionate about protecting and building resilience in vulnerable populations. And I'm just so thankful to be here today and have this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. So a little bit more about our company, AC Disaster Consulting, ACDC. It's been almost 7 years since our founder, Alyssa Carrier, started our company. We are headquartered in Colorado, Denver, Colorado. We are woman-owned and mostly woman-led. Most of our leadership team is made up of women, which is rare for this industry. We have staff all over the country. Liz is in Chicago, Kate's in Detroit. We have a lot of people in Florida and throughout the country. And we have almost 100 full-time staff, but even more project-based or event-based temps that surge throughout the year, depending on what's going on. So a little bit more about our company here, but in general, we consult with state and local governments and federal agencies on disasters, events, all kinds of different things happening to communities. And we have a few examples to share with you later about some that might be of interest to you all that might be kind of up your alley in terms of access and functional needs. But we respond to a lot of events. Liz actually just got back from St. Louis this morning from helping one of our clients, the American Red Cross, do some work after the tornadoes there. I was in Florida for almost 6 weeks last summer for hurricane response. We've respond to wildfires, and like in Colorado, we had a response to the Marshall wildfire that happened in our Boulder area. So a lot of different examples of what we do and how we do it, and just trying to support our clients any way we can. So, okay, I think next slide. Our goals for today are just to bring you guys up to speed on kind of the current state of emergency management, our field, our industry, specifically around planning and preparedness, and as it relates to your community and some potential considerations you might want to be thinking about. We also have a ton of advocacy ideas and resources kind of throughout, and mostly at the end. You'll see a little pink arrow for something that has a link in it. We have shared the slides with NASHIA, so when those go out to you, hopefully you can click on those links. If not, feel free to reach out to us and we can make sure you get connected to those. Hurricane season officially kicked off June 1st. This goes through the end of November, so it's timely that we're here talking with you all. Wildfire season started in May. It's pretty much ongoing year-round now, as we saw in LA. It's in July is the anniversary of the ADA being signed into law. There's a lot of things happening right now this summer that are kind of on our radar as we think about disasters and events and emergencies going on. So I will hand it over to Kate for some fun interaction.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. All right, so we have 115 people in the room, and we recognize that everyone's coming from different experiences, both professional, personal, and definitely, I think emergency management, the thing I love most is that it's super interdisciplinary, right? Like folks from all different sectors have to come together to really prepare for disasters. So in an effort to hear from folks who are in the room, we're going to do a casual, informal poll. So just using the chat feature, when I opened, just as a side note for logistics, when I opened the chat feature in my 2-line, it was directed at only the host and panelists. So if you can make sure that you see the to everyone, just so everybody has visibility in what's going to be shared in the chat. But take a minute and in the chat, if you would share, based on where you are in the world, in the country, what type of disaster are you most likely to be impacted by in the community that you live in or work in?
Can you see the responses, Kate?
Yes, I can. I
Okay,
hope
great.
other folks can too.
Yeah.
I won't read all of them, but I'm seeing hurricanes, power outage and extreme heat, tornado, flooding, wildfire, extreme heat again, blizzard. Feel that over here in Michigan. Missouri tornadoes, yes. Severe thunderstorms, blizzards, yes. Thank you. So really, we're going to talk a little bit today about what is disaster and some of the language that we use in the field, but really just making sure that folks, when you think of disaster, recognizing that it can be both natural disaster and man-made, obviously varying levels of complexity, but really, especially for the brain injury community, right? I think sometimes in the media and in the news, we see catastrophic events, but sometimes a power outage is also catastrophic, and losing power or potable water in your home, running water for a few days can be catastrophic for you and your family and your household. So just remember that, the disasters that you are impacted by can vary, and that the preparedness and planning that we're going to talk about today is hopefully going to help you prepare for all types of disasters. All right, our next question is, have you ever had a conversation with a family member or your caregiver about disaster preparedness? So you can simply answer yes or no, or kind of, or if you want to share a little bit as well, we'd love to hear it. Sorta, love it, yes, no. All of your home health clients, love that. Cool. So not only your family and maybe your caregiver, but also your clients, friends, family. Awesome. Cool. I'm seeing some lived experiences, navigating disasters. Awesome. So our goal today is that if you answered no or sorta or kinda, that today is an awesome opportunity to start that conversation. One of the main messages we hope you hear today is just talk about it, right? Think about it, talk about it, reflect on disaster preparedness. Tell your family that you went to this webinar today. That could be a great first step in just kind of sparking the conversation. And we challenge you, if you haven't had the conversation and you're seeing how, it's expanding beyond just family and caregivers. So think about your clients, think about community groups that you're involved in, or sports teams that your kiddos may play on. Think about how you can have conversations around disaster preparedness in your circle, in your community. All right, last poll question, a little more action oriented, but if you only had a few minutes to leave your house, so if you either were experiencing a house fire, or again, you're getting a notice for evacuation, some of the disasters that we talked about have lead time, right? We may know about them coming a few days in advance, others don't, right? They're sudden. So if you only had a few minutes to leave your home, take a second to reflect on what 5 items would you grab? What are most critical for you to take with you if you had to leave your home? Go bag, dog, spouse, love it. Meds, I see meds. Pets. Glasses, yes. Vital documents. I see someone has a fire safe box. That's incredible. Okay, you must all be preparedness folks because I see a lot of go bags and ready kits, medical records, lots of spouses. Be sure to tell them that you included them in your list. Cell phone, laptop, yes. Kids, medicine, yes. Awesome, great. It's kind of tough to think about, right? And 5 is an arbitrary number, right? But you know, in the event that you did need to leave your home suddenly, are you ready? Are you ready to grab those critical items that are either not replicable or you know, you can't go a period of time without? So again, as we go through today's conversation, we're going to talk more in depth about that, but hopefully, again, as a result of today, you take a minute to just think about those small, realistic steps that you can take now before you're having to leave your home in just a few minutes. Awesome. Thanks so much for the participation. All right. Also recognizing that we have folks from all different sectors. Again, I just want to take a moment to kind of clarify language that you may hear today. When we were prepping with Maria, we were already doing it ourselves. So you'll hear both emergency and disaster. I tend to use disaster. You'll probably hear disaster mostly today. In the field of emergency management, I feel like disaster is common because we're often responding to large scale events, but emergency, like I said, is also very real, right? Especially for this population. Emergencies tend to be, I don't want to say smaller, but localized is probably a better word, right? They're usually managed with local police, fire, EMS. They don't typically require resources outside of those local resources. So things like a house fire, a local chemical spill, or maybe a neighborhood power outage. Those are typically what we think of as emergency, shorter term, more localized. Disaster tend to be those large scale events. They tend to overwhelm the response community. And oftentimes we bring in resources like AC Disaster Consulting or other regional, state, and local support to help respond. The other thing to think about is just how widespread the impacts can be. So we're seeing, not just on a home, but we're seeing economic, we're seeing critical infrastructure in a community, bridges, roads, buildings. Health and safety is often huge, right? Like I said, putting people first in disasters, that tend to see where we see a lot of catastrophic damage, social, emotional, right? We may see formal declarations from large-scale disasters. We'll talk a little bit more about that today. This can be hurricanes, this can be earthquakes, public health pandemics like COVID-19, wildfires. We've talked about these, right? So we'll use it interchangeably today, most likely. But when you're thinking about planning and preparedness, think about if you need to take different steps based on emergency or disaster. Are there things that your family or yourself can do to prepare for these varying degrees of damage that may come with emergency or disasters? And then at the bottom in the yellow box, we wanted to kind of take a second to just talk about the Stafford Act. That is our federal law that defines what a major disaster is. So hurricanes, earthquake, floods, again, can be both natural disaster or man-made, but it's events that cause significant damage in our country. The Stafford Act includes language that decides if it requires a presidential declaration, and that's again when major disaster assistance is needed. Other things that I think are applicable to our conversation today that I wanted to talk about is just in general state and federal law and regulation, like the Stafford Act, like the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act, like Liz mentioned, ADA, civil rights law. There are important legal protections and obligations that are stated in these state and federal laws and regulations that protect populations like the brain injury community. We want to make sure that people with disability, access, and functional needs are considered in all aspects of disaster preparedness, response, recovery. And so the Stafford Act is critical in supporting disaster response and recovery. And just some examples, I think, there's non-discrimination protection. We'll talk about inclusive planning today. So making sure that, the community is centered around planning and preparedness. And also sets best practice and standards for organizations like FEMA, and even ourselves at AC Disaster Consulting, that, we are addressing the needs of folks that have access and functional needs in all of our emergency management and response. So you'll hear more about that today. So Liz, or actually I think I have one more slide. One more slide. So again, to kind of share a little bit of the language that we use in the field of emergency management, if you're not from this field. So emergency management, even though we just spent time talking about disasters, is how we plan for, respond to, and recover from disasters. So it is, again, a super interdisciplinary field that helps keep people safe. We typically think about the emergency management life cycle in 4 phases. So the first being preparedness, even though it's really continuous, right? But the first is usually preparedness, and that is anything from writing emergency response plans at any level of government or organization, training and exercise, go kits, we heard from all of you, any steps that you're taking to be prepared, right? Response is that action immediately following when disaster strikes. So it's really focused on stabilizing a community, incident stabilization, property preservation. We'll talk about that today. It could include evacuation guidance, operating shelters, and then, of course, providing mass care services and more. Recovery is really focused on, getting folks back to some kind of normalcy, right? Restoring services and continuity of services. So it could be economic recovery, it could be debris management and cleanup, it could be transitional housing or temporary housing as folks rebuild and recover, and then, of course, health and human services. And then mitigation, again, is one that kind of is continuous, but it's really that prevention. So sometimes we see mitigation occurring after a disaster, but the goal is that we see it occur before a disaster and that folks take steps to reduce long-term risk, right? Reduce the impacts of disaster. This can be through public education. This could be by conducting hazard and vulnerability assessments, right? Like today, you're going to hear over and over again, the first thing we want you to do is just think about what risks are, applicable to you. And then it might also be making physical changes to infrastructure. So installing wind mitigation on your home or installing a backup generator so you're prepared for that long-term power outage. Any kind of, physical changes that you can make to your community or your surroundings that can help minimize the impacts of disaster. So you'll hear these words. We're happy to share more about it, but just wanted to kind of center folks around some of the work that we do in the field of emergency management. So Liz, anything to add? And if not, take it away.
Thanks, Kate. Maria, I see your question. Does mitigation also include hazardous materials and substances? Can you elaborate on that? I mean, certainly, if I'd love to hear you elaborate on it, maybe a little bit more, and then I can answer maybe better.
Well, I'm just thinking, when hazardous materials are dropped on an interstate or people have, substances nearby. Personally, I'm thinking about radon. Bigger than that, when hazardous materials are dropped on the road, there's a spill. Is that where mitigation fits in, or is that like a kind of another category?
Yeah, that initial spill will be, the response phase, the cleanup phase, and then there will potentially be some recovery if there's any long-term effects, and then hopefully there'll be some mitigation factors. That's okay. Why did this spill happen? When you look into whether it be traveling on a road, traveling on a rail line, was the car old? Was the container busted? How do we make those containers better so that we prevent this happen? So it's a great question. I think that really leads into the fact that emergency management doesn't happen individually in one cycle. They're often They go together. They often bounce between one or another. As Liz mentioned, I was just in St. Louis, and they've had back to back to back disasters, major tornadoes, and so they've been responding, recovering, and have not really had a chance to move out of those phases. So, great question. Really appreciate it. And again, we are monitoring the chat. So if you have any other questions or thoughts, please chime in. So, like Kate mentioned, we're really talking about what can you do personally, what your community do to prepare for that, really that personal preparedness and also that community preparedness. So a lot of times we use the words planning and preparedness interchangeably. But I think they are incredibly distinct because as it says, planning is knowing what to do. We can know what to do, right? And preparedness is having the action. It's the action oriented, making sure that you can do it. So I know I need a go bag, but knowing that doesn't mean I have a go bag, right? So we, as an emergency management planner by heart, we talk all the time about, well, we write the best plans, but if they stay on the proverbial shelf and collect dust, if they're on a drive that only 3 people can access, or they've never been socialized, then those plans are as good as never being written. So that's really the start of any preparedness action, is thinking about it. So writing down what you're going to do, make that emergency plan, start with yourself and your immediate environment, and then start working your way out, talking to your family, talking to folks that live near you, that live away from you. So if you're in an area of impact, that you can know you can go somewhere else. Thinking about from step A to step B, everything that you could need along the way. Kate and both Liz and I have all been really active in the training and exercise. That's a natural part of our job is, we write the plan and then we validate it. We make sure that it works. So that's really part of that planning cycle. Thinking about identifying in your community shelters or services or any transportation needs. If you have a service animal or if you have your pet, does the shelter allow for pets to come in? Planning some of that ahead and getting really involved with your emergency management community to learn those things. And then once you've gotten it all written down, make sure it doesn't just go to live on a shelf and become a really nice paperweight or become that spam that's on your desktop taking up place. Share it with folks. Have it posted somewhere. As we talk about my previous career as a paramedic, I loved coming into a house or a home or folks had things posted, here are my medications, having that stuff readily available really helps. So then once you have all that and you've talked, and yes, Linda, we did see your message. We will absolutely talk about sheltering in place. So that's a really great point. So if you're unable to leave, what do you need in order to be sheltering in place? What provisions do you need? What can you do to have some of those mitigation things to help harden your localized workplace? And then who do you communicate with directly in your community in order to get resources to you quickly? So really thank you for bringing that up, and we'll certainly touch on that a little bit later as well. So then once you've gotten all that, written down out of your brain, talk with your community, talk with your caregivers, practice it, prepare, make sure that you have the stuff. We always say, we recommend in our go bag, have canned food. But nobody ever says, but also have a can opener. So think about the food that you're packing, whether it be MREs or shelf stable food, but what do you need in order to actually eat them and get to them? And yes, Martin, we recommend revisiting your plan regularly all the time. As planners, that's part of our initial planning cycle. It's okay, how we're going to start writing this plan, who's on the core planning team or who's in our core family and immediate planning team. And then how frequently do we want to all meet? How frequently do we want to pull this thing out, dust it off, and make sure it still applies? So our, a general best practice, there's an event, make sure that that you check in and say, did this plan work during the event? If you have a major change in your environment, make sure you update that to make sure that it matches your new environment, your new home. And then if none of those apply, just pick a random interval that works best for you and your team. And yes, Jim, make sure it's a manual can opener, nothing that requires batteries. Yeah, so and then make sure everything's ready to go. Again, if you have a really great go bag or a really great go box, I've seen folks that are like, yeah, I've got a phenomenal box and it's massive and they can't lift it. It's no good. So it's got to be go. It's got to be, I saw somebody use the term bug out. You got to be ready to grab it and get it to go, or have it pre-positioned, or make sure that if you're unable to lift or move things, make sure that you have somebody assigned, or make sure you get one that has wheels or that is able to move with an electronic assistance. So lots of options out there. And then lastly, practice, practice, practice. I know sometimes it might feel silly. We think it's really fun, especially when we get to do like a functional exercise or even a full scale, and we get to practice what we preach, and practice what you've written down, making sure it works. And you learn so much during that. You may think you have the best plan in the world, but then once you put it into action, you say, well, actually, this isn't really how it's going to sugar out. I'm not going to communicate with these people, or I'm not going to be able to get this bag to this location, or the roads might be blocked. So you learn by practicing. Love the questions and comments.
Liz,
Did you have something?
can I add one thing? I was just at a conference
Yeah.
actually, and
Yeah.
I also feel like sometimes we just have to make it fun. I feel like sometimes talking about disasters and emergencies is heavy, right? Because it's scary, it's unknown. There's a huge emotional component to it, right? Thinking about the worst day that could happen to you and your family, but we can also still make it fun. And so I was just at a conference where they have a board game about different aspects of emergency preparedness. So if you have kiddos at home, or if you can make the conversation around preparedness also fun into a game, or we think about it kind of formally because that's this is our industry, but it can also be casual and easy and approachable for you and your family and the people in your community.
Thanks, Kate. Love that. Yeah, and I'll just really elevate the fact that get your kids involved. No matter how young. I have a 3-year-old and I'm constantly shocked at how much she absorbs and regurgitates back. But they're, get things that make them have them have a little go back, something that they can grab. How fast can you get down the stairs? Make it like a drill and stuff, make it fun. Great. Yeah. So just to kind of give you a really large overview of planning and preparedness. So we talk about, obviously, we're going to really hamper on individual preparedness because that's what you can control what's within your realm. But just to give you a little bit more of what else is out there. So we have, kind of 4 categories: the policies and the systems that are been in place by emergency management practitioners, the community, what organizational level things, and then we get down and hone in on that individual caregiver. So emergency management in the field of emergency management hasn't been around for very long. It's really became really large and invested in really after 9/11. So some of the frameworks that have come out, as we've talked about, the Stafford Act, where it really breaks out, who has what responsibilities, what the expectations are at the state level, at the federal level. And then we've broken it out into systems so that we're all speaking the same language. We talk about common operating picture, but being able to speak the same language and keep plain language using something like NIMS, where if I can go and respond in Maine or I can respond in California, I'm going to have a similar system because it's cutting out that time, making sure that we have the ability to work together as emergency managers and respond to the people. Then we talk about the community. So, volunteer agencies, we, don't talk a ton about VOADs and volunteer agencies active in disasters, but things like CERT, community emergency response teams, getting involved in that, learning where the CERT teams are in your area. We talk about coalitions, resource sharing, working together with those other organizations in your area to really force multiply. Public health preparedness, prior to COVID, it was also a relatively new field. Both Kate and I, all of us are really coming from a public health background. And so, prior to COVID, it's like, oh, we'll pull out this pandemic plan, we'll never use that. And then boom, and there we go. And then having registries and things that you can access. And then we talk about, at the organizational level, we start getting into the things that we mentioned, doing a risk assessment, doing a THIRA, something that we do in the emergency management world, a threat and hazard, and never remember the I. But it's a risk assessment where we see what's actually we sit down and have those conversations. What are we going to experience here? The likelihood of me experiencing a hurricane in Chicago is hopefully slim to none, but my parents down on the coast of South Carolina, it's pretty high. So when we're thinking about how we respond and what we need to do to get ready, our area and our threats look very different, which help influence our emergency plans. And then it leads into that fun training and exercise, making sure those plans and those all of that that work actually is useful. Stockpiling supplies. So we always my boss and our VP is we kind of call her has an entire bunker of stuff. She's like a true emergency manager, but we can't stress that enough that you need stuff. The kind of basis timeline in emergency management is really 48 hours. It's really, the government is small, the government it takes time for them to respond. So it's kind of stockpiling those supplies. I don't recommend getting mostly toilet paper, even though that seems to be what happens in during hurricane season. But make sure you have a variety. Make sure you have food, water, and all the necessities. And then again, we're harping really on that individual caregiver. Medications, talking to your doctors now about prescription refills and whether or not you can get a 90-day supply versus a 30-day supply, recognizing that there are some barriers with insurance. But it's certainly worth the conversation. Any home medical equipment, any adaptive equipment or assistive technology, and especially durable medical equipment. Thinking about what transportations of, how do you access emergency transportation if you don't have a car or you don't drive? And then again, talking about that evacuation plan versus sheltering in place. And then one of the most important ones, even though all topics are important, is really that alert and warning notifications. We know that I get alerts all the time in Chicago because we're so big. Something happens all the time here. And I think, man, I really want to turn this off. But it's useful to know what's going on in your community, what's going on around, even if it's not directly affecting you, it could potentially affect you. And there's many different types of alerts and warnings. We can get them from the National Weather Service. You can get them from your local EM. So really finding out which ones are available in your community. Great. So moving into this individual and caregiver preparedness. This is really something that we just can't stress enough. I know we're really harping on it, but it's the most important thing because especially in this day and age in emergency management, as we know, a lot of things are changing in our administration and the way in which the federal government responds, which also will trickle down and affect our local government. So really focusing on what we can control, which is our individual, making sure caregivers, and their families are also prepared. So, talk about how you're either going to leave your home or start to prepare for sheltering in place. What kinds of things are you able to do in what we call blue sky days or non-emergent days to help bolster that? We talk about when we're putting together our individual go kits and things like that. It's a lot. It can be expensive to buy things all at once, but pick one item and say, okay, this month I'm gonna get a radio, or and slowly start to build that cadre. There's always stuff to do. So when you're talking about, honing back in on evacuation and sheltering, is looking at the community around you, knowing multiple routes out of your neighborhood, in case they're blocked. Again, we're using Chicago as an example where we rely heavily on mass transportation. We have certain triggers that will turn all of our trains outside of the city. So knowing that, you can find those types of information in emergency management plans that are written for your city. So you can do a little bit of research and see, does that apply to me? And then also really harping in on that plan for sheltering in place if it's not safe. Do you have enough food and water available? Do you have Now they have portable solar panels where you can put those outside and have those ready for you so that you do have access to power. Do you have enough medication? Do you have a way to stay in touch with folks? I think people underestimate the power of a walkie-talkie and how far they can go, old school radio styles. But even having if you have neighbors next door that are available to evacuate, seeing if there's something in their house that you can tap into if in your immediate. So there's a lot of ways to get creative about sheltering in place. And then again, I think this was already brought up. Write them down, type them up, whatever means that you is most accessible for you, and review them regularly. If there's something that changes in your life, the first thing you need to think of is, okay, I need to think about how this affects my evacuation plan or my emergency management plan. And so then also talking about accessible communication. So we really, really stress using plain language, visual tools, symbols. As you get heightened, your tunnel vision gets smaller and smaller. So, we're thinking about the stress on our bodies, the stress on our minds. It can be a very scary situation. So you want that plan to be super easy. What's going to key you in, what pictures are going to key you in, and keeping any devices that you need to use in order to communicate with folks ready and charged with extra batteries. Or we also recommend having things that don't require batteries, a good old hand crank radio, things like that. And then again, getting connected with your community. We can't stress this enough. I love nothing more being when I worked for the state is having folks call me directly or email me, hey, could you come talk to me about my plan? Could you review my plan? Emergency managers love that. Getting connected with them and also saying, well, hey, what's in your plan? Have you thought about this? Really advocating for yourself and for your community. Asking about what alert systems are available. Ask them specifically, do you have anything for the brain injury community that is specific to us? Have you thought about it? And making sure that their plans are accessible for all community in that whole community. Oh, goodness. So sorry. Boom. Okay, I think we got here. We've already kind of talked about this a little bit, but caregiver preparedness. So can't stress this enough, making sure that your caregivers, if you or I've seen already in here that you're talking to your clients, making sure that you're a part of that planning process, that you understand, especially folks that serve multiple clients and multiple people. I know that can be a lot. So, making sure that it aligns with keeping your family safe, kind of the you and your family. We talk about the mentality of the airline. You have to put your own mask on to take care of others. And we talk about that in EMS a lot. So really making sure that you're prepared so that you can take care of you, because if you're unavailable or, it really affects the folks that you're caring. So we also always talk about that individual preparedness as well, to make sure that while you're a caregiver, you're also cared for. We've talked about that personal go kit, making sure you have hard copies. I loved that someone had already mentioned this in there. You guys are emergency management pros here. But making sure that you have cash. We can't stress that enough. Power outages go out, businesses are unavailable, especially when we talk about weather events. They're unavailable to use their credit card machine. So having that cash available. And it doesn't have to just be a bag of things that get you through. It needs to be comfort items. Do you have a blanket that you love so much, a book that helps calm you down, headphones for music, things like that, and then a written version of your emergency plan, especially with your communication plan. And then obviously our pets, we don't want to leave them out. So any service animal or non-service animal, just a pet, making sure that you have food and water and the medication that they need. A little blanket that you can throw in that can be a makeshift dog bed, food and water bowls, a ball, something to give them a little bit of a comfort item as well. So they're certainly part of the family. All right. Turn it back over to you, Kate.
Yeah, thanks. We I want to address one thing before I go in, because I think before I joined the emergency management field, when I heard the word sheltering, I thought of like community run shelters, right? Where everyone is in the, a school or right, like a communal space. And a lot of times those are worst case scenario. They are a critical service in the time of disaster, but when you think about sheltering, think about it in all aspects for you, right? So like you may shelter you might go to a family member's house who still doesn't have supplies and the things that you may need to meet your basic needs, but a lot of the same preparedness messaging applies regardless of where you're sheltering. So whether it's a community run kind of traditional emergency management shelter, or you're just sheltering in an unknown place, not your daily home, a lot of the same sheltering preparations still apply. So I just wanted to kind of make that clarification of like consider all places that you may shelter, including in your own home. Okay, so we wanted to share just a few tangible examples of some of the work that we've done in the field. And I think, again, this helps kind of contextualize and provide examples of how all of this becomes actionable. So we supported the state of North Carolina, both their Department of Health and Human Service and UNCG, University of North Carolina, Greensboro, worked together to update their disaster behavioral response plan. Like Liz said, this is a written document that basically starts to outline roles and responsibilities for folks who would support disaster, behavioral health needs during the time of disaster. So sometimes our health and human service partners and agencies aren't always included in emergency management conversations. And this plan really brought together all sectors of the community that can support people with disaster behavioral health needs. The Oregon Department of Human Service, ODHS, this was actually during COVID because a lot of folks were sheltering in place, right? They were kind of staying home during the pandemic. They didn't have access to typical services or supplies at stores and things like that. So again, thinking about disaster specific, kind of how some of these preparedness terms may shift, but they recognized that they needed a tool that would help walk people through decision making. So I heard somebody say like how making the decision between sheltering in place and evacuating is a really hard decision, and you're making a lot of decisions really quick, which again can be really tough, especially for people in the brain injury community, right? So basically it's a step-by-step guide that says, do you have your medication? Do you have food and water? Are you able to communicate access and functional needs to a person that's not familiar with meeting your needs? What personal care services might you need? Help with bathing or food and feeding, right? And so this was a tool that was both individual specific, but then also for the people that serve individuals in the aging and people with disability population. So came from a need during COVID and obviously is ready for multiple disasters. You can see it's a really small, but in Oregon, they think through extreme heat, winter storm, even earthquake. And then the last example, another recent project that we worked on, this was in Westchester County, New York. This project was developing a training series for shelter workers and managers. So the folks that are operating those community-run shelters, making sure that they have an understanding of access and functional needs and how to support people that are coming to the shelter. And it again just was a really tangible way that the community, really tangible step that the community took to make sure that they can support all folks in those congregate community shelters. All right, we are running kind of short on time, so we'll maybe kick it up a notch so we have a few moments for questions at the end. Liz, thanks.
Yeah, we just want to highlight a few examples brought to our attention from the brain injury community. Iowa and Pennsylvania both have some awesome toolkits around emergency preparedness. We included the links, and then we also found one from Australia. I know Australia is always a leader in some of the brain injury efforts. So if you know of others, feel free to drop them in the chat. Definitely something to think about from your state's perspective or your brain injury association, or whatever facility you're associated with, it's always good to have some of these toolkits in place and consider updating and revisiting throughout the year. Next slide, please. We anticipated maybe some questions about FEMA, so we put together 2 slides just with some current information that what is true today, what we know today that we want to share with you, just to potentially answer any questions ahead of time. So the administration put together a review council back in the end of January, and our company actually knows a couple of people that are on the council, and they've been providing some updates about how it's going. They are meeting regularly and putting together a report of recommendations that will be due by the end of September to the president. And it will include, recommended changes to help meet the goal of the initial executive order that we have listed here. So FEMA as we know it may look different later this year when we see these recommendations roll out, but we still we don't know exactly what that's going to look like just yet. So stay tuned. Next slide, please. Here's what we know today. So 3 main points. About 2,000 full-time FEMA employees have left the agency, which is about 1/3 of their entire staff. And that has enriched the employer market. So there are a ton of people out there looking for jobs, as you all probably know. The current administration is denying disaster assistance at a greater rate than previous administrations. So a number of our state and local clients are not receiving the declarations that they were used to receiving in similar events previously. And then we're also seeing partial declarations. So I won't get into all of the weeds of IA and PA and all the acronyms that FEMA uses, but in general, what we're noticing is that declarations are including assistance to individuals and families, but we're not seeing public assistance included in those, which is typically how states fund efforts such as debris removal and restoring public infrastructure. So things are shifting from what this industry is used to, and we're just kind of monitoring what we know and supporting our clients as much as we can. Few takeaways: there is and will be more responsibility for state and local governments as opposed to the federal government. And so we will see less of a federal footprint at disasters and events. And so it's more important than ever to be prepared and to self-sustain as much as possible, given what we know today, and that there will likely be fewer resources after an event. Okay, next slide.
I can take this one. All right. So as we wrap up, we wanted to just share some really specific action and call to action steps that you can take. So you've heard some of these, but again, things to think about for you and your family and those folks in your community. I think that even despite lots of changes in the field and changes in disaster preparedness, I think what's promising is that there's a saying that's a norm of like disasters start and end at the local level. And I think when disaster strikes, I think if you've ever been a part of a disaster, it is grassroots, like all hands on deck at the community level. It's neighbors helping neighbors, it's community coalitions and nonprofits and, community-based organizations coming together to rally and to support, the people closest to them. So the good news is that a lot of our communities are already positioned to take on changes, but it will absolutely have an impact, and it absolutely will be challenging to navigate going forward. So these are some things that we can do in our control, and you can start today. So if you are not familiar with local registries, alert and warning notifications, the social media channels that are state, local, federal, find those and sign up for those, because we have a large geographic representation today. Again, not providing specific examples, but again, think about all of the ways that you can receive those those, accessible and inclusive communications in your community. Liz mentioned if you do not have your medications, your personal care needs already ready, written down, ready to communicate to a dispatcher, somebody that's responding to your home, family, friend, a new caregiver, be prepared for changes in your care, right? Therapists, any social services, right? Those people may also be impacted by a disaster and may not be able to provide the normal care that they do for you and people in the brain injury community. Find those spaces in your community that are having the same conversation, right? That are already taking the steps for disaster preparedness, and recognize they may not be traditional, right? I think sometimes those non-traditional partners are the most powerful. Who has backup generators in their building, right? Who already has space to support feeding in your community? Who's building a community resilience hub? It could, a community center. Know what spaces in your community may be able to specifically meet access and functional needs during the time of disaster. Know your leadership. Again, when we talk about advocacy, know who your state emergency manager director is, know your county emergency manager, know who your health department officer is, know the folks that you can talk to and advocate for, disaster preparedness for the brain injury community. If you are super passionate about emergency management or curious about emergency management, FEMA does offer free, literally a bajillion free training courses through the Emergency Management Institute. Everything you could probably ever want to know about emergency management is available to you. So check out those. Get involved in a local coalition, hospital preparedness coalition. Maybe you have a disaster preparedness coalition in your community. Maybe you have an access and functional needs coalition in your community, or a small working group of an existing community coalition. So get involved. We also recognize that all of this requires money. It's often sometimes the hardest, even at the individual level. Liz mentioned, like, getting a go bag, that's a cost, right? Like, that's a privilege. So get really creative about identifying grants and funding resources. Again, tapping into that local community funding that may be able to support planning and preparedness with a school or with an organization that you're a part of. And then we mentioned this, but, again, get creative about training and exercise. You have to practice preparedness. It is a skill, just like any of the other skills that we have. This could be, again, at your school, with your family, in the community that you live in, if you're in a shared living community space. It really is fun. It can be fun to talk about disaster preparedness and practice it. So think about ways that you may be able to facilitate training and exercise and have a conversation similar like today. All right. I think our last slide is just resources, which again will be linked in the slides that were shared. So if we can, kind of open the floor for questions.
So we did, while folks are marinating on it, we had a great question about cell service and reliance on mobile phones. It's a fantastic question. I did drop some info in the chat, but the short and skinny of it is, if there's no cell service, you're not getting alerts and you're not communicating. So the reliance should be with a focus on that. We always recommend redundant communication. So how deep you want to go with that. Landlines, we see folks, there was a huge push, people started taking them out of their homes, but then now we're starting to see them come back in, especially if you're planning on sheltering in place. We always recommend having a landline in place, and then getting something on the radio waves. So, there are certainly, we're not going to say there aren't instances where all types of those communications don't get wiped out. But certainly radio waves are mostly are the most redundant. So being able to receive those alerts, and then getting creative, having communication points. So sometimes cell phones are jammed. Like in Chicago, we have so many people. If people are trying to call each other locally, it's really hard, but they'll actually be able to call out further. So having a point of contact in a few states away. So Liz and I could say, okay, well, I know that when I'm okay, I'll call Kate because she's over in Michigan, and you call Kate, and she can let her know that we're both okay. Let's see, we got some in the slide. What do we think? from Kivalina. I hope I said that right. What do we think the impacts of cuts to the National Weather Service will impact emergency preparedness, especially in rural areas? It's a really great question. Unfortunately, it's negative. It's going to be a negative impact. I think it's going to be pretty great. I think it's going to really shorten um, our lead time. We're going to have less specific information about what the disaster or what the weather event might be. So, now we're seeing folks that they have the staff that can analyze wind speed, they can analyze what direction it's going to go in. So a lot of those specifics um, are going to be lacking, with those staff cuts. Unfortunately, it's gonna make it harder to prepare. So that's a great question.
I will say, can I add to that really quick? We
Absolutely.
we worked on an alert and warning project in Colorado actually, and I didn't know this, so many of the folks on the call may not either. But National Weather Service is just one organization that has a role in alert and warning. So depending on the type of disaster, it could be local sheriff, it could be, there's different organizations that have a role in alert and warning. So that's another thing I think to kind of learn about your community in the disasters that you might be impacted by. Know who is responsible for making the alert and warning and providing the guidance for, like evacuation guidance is typically a different party. So I know there's a trickle down effect from the National Weather Service, but a lot of different entities have a role in alert and warning and providing guidance around evacuation and such.
Couple of other questions. Maria, yes, is this information offered in different languages? Yes, we will try to provide some links that show, I believe on the federal sites, you're actually able to change the language directly on that site into the language that you need. But we'll make sure we look and see if anything else that we added, we'll send that over to be shared. Another great question from April Press, when having to evacuate, how has medical and public transportation been used to assist with that? So that's a great question to ask your emergency managers, your local or your state. So I can give a great example of that in the large metro cities. As mentioned, we turn the L or the CTA, they away from the central business district, which is where the bean is, everything that's downtown, where all of our infrastructure is. So in order to get people out of there, there will be large announcements. There will be people, we're actually in the Office of Emergency Management have control and are able to take over all of the virtual billboards in the city to provide those emergency alerts saying, get on the bus. Buses on the corner, get on the CTA, get on these public transportation. It's going to take you out of the city and away into the suburbs and to pre-designated shelters and things set up outside of the downtown. So that's just one example, but we always encourage asking your local municipality, do you think about this? How, if I rely on public transportation, how will I know how it will be used during evacuation? That's a really great question.
Awesome. Awesome. I hate that we're out of time. This is such great information, and I know that I've got 100 other questions in my head. It sounds very much like you're saying there's a lot of things that people don't know that are going to be available if something occurs. But I also hear it's good to be proactive, for any constituency that you represent, getting in there and making sure that things are prepared so they can be prepared too. So super information, lots of resources for you to access, and we so appreciate you sharing all that with us. Thank you so much. You have a link to the evaluation, you have a link to the slides, and then everything will be posted on our website later. So we appreciate you guys sharing. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great to see all of you. Thank you guys so much, and good luck this season.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.